Hello everyone and welcome back to Mossy Bottom. The cockerels welcome you, it's spring, everyone's happy. This is my homestead in County Sligo in the west of Ireland, where I've lived now for 6 years. Can you believe it's been that long? It really doesn't feel like it. This video is all about tools and equipment. And 6 years ago I drove here with only what I could fit in my Honda Jazz, the car I had at the time. Although fit is a very polite word, cram is probably more accurate because it was completely overloaded, including the roof rack. But looking back, I realised there are things which I really didn't need, and equally things which I bought years later that I wish I'd had from the beginning. So in this video, I'm going to count down the tools and equipment which I think, based on my 6 years here, are the most essential for anyone starting out on a homestead like mine. And of course, this list is not exhaustive. There are many additional items you'll need to live and countless other tools which are useful and, depending on the job, even vital, which you will have to buy or borrow or rent, as I have over the years, to get things done. And I'll give you a good example of one such tool. This! For the first 2 years, I didn't have one of these, but I did have to erect hundreds of meters of fence, and I used a stone to hammer the posts in. This is, of course, a fence post hammer. They're about 60 euros here. And of course, this has a very niche job, but if you want to build fences on any kind of scale, it makes that job much easier. The stone method, never again. I had blisters for months. I've tried to rank these tools in order of importance from least to most within 3 categories: building, growing, and living. So let's get started. There are countless building projects here at Mossy Bottom every year, from rabbit enclosures to chicken assault courses to my granary, which I've now almost completed, as you can see. And it would be very hard to make anything with timber without one of these. And this is a set square, or a rafter square, or a carpenter square as it's often called. Basically, it's a perfect right angle used to quickly mark a 90-degree square angle in a piece of timber, and to check that existing angles are square. Now, I have several of these now, including an oversized wooden one, which I made myself for constructing the cabin and checking that all those joints were perfectly at 90 degrees. This is called an oscillating multi-tool, but I just call it my nibbler. I've only had it for about 2 years of the 6 that I've lived here, but I now use it in pretty much every project that I work on because it's so incredibly versatile. And honestly, I wish I'd bought one sooner. It's basically a mechanical chisel, which very accurately and very efficiently cuts little pieces out of wood. Here's 2 examples I use it for in my granary: cutting a wedge for the steps and trimming the shelf supports so they actually fit in the 100-year-old holes made when this building was constructed. Technically, there's nothing this thing can do that a good quality sharp chisel can't. It's just quicker, easier, and pretty much turns timber into Play-Doh. Next, the spirit level, which comes in varying lengths and sizes, and much like the set square, is vital for making sure that everything you build is square. Just place it on your surface and make sure that the bubble is in the middle. In the granary, I used it to make sure all of these joists were perfectly level, despite the holes all being at different heights. Without my spirit level, this floor wouldn't have been much fun to walk on, that's for sure. Gloves are next. And over the years, I've used dozens of types of work glove, from really expensive ones to throwaway cheap ones. And I've realised the expensive ones fail in the fingertips just as quickly as the cheap ones do. I now keep only 2 types. These, which are insulated and waterproof, and the only type which I found keep my hands warm and dry in the winter. And these, which I use for carpentry work in the summer. They're light and ventilate well. Living on a homestead, your hands will definitely take more damage than any other part of your body. And I haven't included them on this list, but truthfully, these are probably the most important tools that you will ever have, apart from maybe this. Next, duct tape or electrical tape, which is the smaller version of it. And you can buy this everywhere, even in supermarkets, but it is just so useful. The number of times something splits, like a hosepipe, or just needs holding together. Its application is certainly not limited to wires, which I believe is what it was originally made for. I'm sure many of you use this stuff every week in your homes, and on a homestead it becomes even more valuable. Next, ear and eye protectors. It's amazing what you can create with basic tools and ingenuity, but to do that you need every part of your body to be working. And in the second week I was here, back in the summer of 2016, I got a splinter in my right eye which scratched the cornea and took 2 weeks to heal, during which time I was trying to get everything up and running here with one eye covered in a patch. You can imagine how hard that was. It wasn't the most auspicious of starts to my life here at Mossy Bottom, but it did make me invest in some of these pretty darn quickly. This video is sponsored by the lovely team at Skillshare, which is an online community for learning or developing skills through educational and fun video classes. They've become a long-term sponsor of my channel, who I'm always very proud to work with, because frankly I've learned so much there myself over the years, and I really believe in using video as an accessible medium through which to share knowledge, which is exactly what they do really well. Behind me, as well as a buzzing bee, is a sewing machine, a tool which you won't find on my list today, but was used to make the very curtains in this cabin. And here's a class on Skillshare, Hand Sewing Basics, Make and Mend Your Clothing by Bernadette Banner, a dress historian, which couldn't be more relatable, I think, to a self-sufficient life. And if that whets your appetite, then there are plenty more classes on Skillshare on the subject of sewing, including how to make your own clothing and how to upcycle a new garment. If you plan on starting a homestead or just becoming more self-reliant, then what a great skill to learn. The best thing about Skillshare is that the classes are all taught by industry professionals, and unlike most YouTube videos, they're structured in a way that makes learning easy and fun. Finally, the first 1,000 of my viewers to sign up using my code or the link down in the description will get a 1-month free trial of Skillshare, so you can start exploring your creativity today. Now, there's a lot of hand tools that you really need, and I'd recommend a small toolbox with the basics: spanners, screwdrivers, wire cutters, that sort of thing. But these pliers, I think, are the most useful and versatile, and even better, the mole wrench, which may have a different name in different parts of the world, but that's what my dad always called it. This is basically a pair of pliers which locks for added strength. If you have rusted screws that you can't get out, a nut that you need to remove or tighten but you don't have the right size spanner for, or a piece of wire you need to twist or pull out, these things will do the job. Kind of like a multi-tool, I love my mole wrench because it's so versatile. It can be used for so many different things. Next, and the third most essential building tool on my list, is the trusty tape measure. And if you can build something usable without one of these, then you're a better carpenter than me, that's for sure. I also use a tape measure constantly when out gardening, growing food, for planting out, for marking rows, that kind of thing. I have a much bigger 10-meter one which isn't affected by moisture. Taking the time to measure things saves so much more time later on. The only problem with tape measures is, like pencils, they're forever sprouting legs and disappearing. At number 2 on my countdown, we have the mighty miter saw, or if you're on a really tight budget, the hand saw. Both these do the same thing, but this does it an awful lot quicker and a lot more accurately. What makes this by far the most essential mechanical saw when doing any kind of building work with timber is that it's designed to efficiently cut at a 90-degree angle over and over again perfectly. You can also set it to cut miter joints at 45 degrees or any angle in between. It's just the workhorse of any kind of building project, and even this example, the cheapest miter saw which money can buy, has become essential in my life. I'm not sure if that's tragic or something to be proud of. I guess it says a lot about the way I live. If you can only buy one mechanical saw, make sure it's a miter saw. You can live without a table saw. I've never been able to afford one. Jigsaws and circular saws I do use occasionally, but the miter saw or chop saw is a must-have and so much more efficient than using one of these. Finally, at number 1 on my list of essential building tools, and I'm sure you all saw this coming, it is, of course you did, the drill. And I'm not a fan of nails. They split timber, they're almost impossible to remove if you make a mistake. I much prefer to pilot hole and then screw things together. It's stronger, it can be undone, and it's more accurate. For that, you need a drill. Down here I have what's called an SDS drill, which is good for chiseling masonry, and this is a corded drill, which is much more powerful. But what you really need when starting out are these cordless drills, which have 2 gears, they're very easy to control, and very versatile. In case you're wondering, people often ask me, no, I don't own an impact driver. I have used them extensively when I was out in Canada, but I found there's nothing that I can't screw with a good drill. Why does that sound so wrong? Next, we have the most essential tools used for the cultivation of land, for growing food, basically. And yes, there are many more which you likely will need, but these are the ones which get the most use, and I wish I'd had from the very beginning. First, this thing, the iron bar. And this may surprise you, it wasn't something that I arrived with. I had to buy one locally in that first year. But if, like me, you live somewhere with rocky soil that hasn't already been cultivated, when I moved here, this area had never been farmed or grown on, this tool is the only way to get those rocks out, short of hiring a digger, of course. Never use a garden fork or a spade to do what an iron bar is designed for, because if you do, you'll be back down the garden centre buying a new fork or spade. And yes, I learnt that the hard way. And I'm afraid I'm not going to demonstrate using one of these, because the first rule of iron bars is never dig out rocks unless you absolutely have to. It is back-breaking work. Next, the hoe. And there are all sorts of different types of hoe, all designed to help remove weeds and take your hard-earned money, of course. But there's only one type of hoe I think that you really need, and it's this, the stirrup hoe. Also called, I think, a scuffle hoe. It uproots weeds, which you then leave to desiccate in the sun if you can get any. And that's why I always try and hoe when I know it'll be sunny for the next few days. Otherwise, those weeds can re-root into damp ground. The reason this is the only hoe you need is because it's quick and very efficient on large areas, like the kind you're going to have if you're growing vegetables on a larger scale. This I will demonstrate. A bit of a sit down after all that hoeing. Next, the humble watering can. And yes, I still use my trusty double watering can system here in the tunnel, except now it's become a triple watering can system. Because every second day, when I water everything in here, it gives me time to observe and think carefully about what needs doing. And I really enjoy that. It's sort of like the gardening equivalent of going for a walk in the woods with moss. And of course, different crops need different amounts of water depending on their development. Overwatering encourages moulds and mildew, and that's the last thing you want in the west of Ireland. So irrigation systems which automate that aren't necessarily a good thing, unless of course you're growing on a huge scale, in which case you have to have them. But for me, the humble watering can is sufficient, and I love it. Modular trays, these things are next. And of course, you also need compost and seeds to make these work. But believe me, starting seeds in modular trays and then potting on, as I have done here, you can see we've got some chives growing away, prior to planting outside or even into the tunnel, certainly results in much bigger, healthier crops. It allows you to start earlier, giving you a longer growing season in a controlled environment like a polytunnel or on a windowsill in your house, without pests, without frost, in perfect soil conditions. If you plant vegetable seeds directly into the soil, you could well lose the entire crop to slugs or to birds in the first few days of germination. The only things I don't use modular trays for, this one is my absolute favourite, are carrots, which I broadcast sow outside and then cover in a net. I have to admit though, I do have a bit of a love-hate relationship with these things, even though I think they're vital when growing seeds. The problem is people tend to push the bottoms up and deform them. They only last maybe 4 or 5 years before I have to throw them out, and that's something I absolutely hate doing. Next year I'm going to try and get some better made ones, which may be a bit more expensive but last much longer and are more sustainable. That's the main thing. They are essential though, I have to admit it.
Yes.
Next, the spade. And the great thing about a good strong spade is that it also doubles up as a shovel, unlike a shovel, which definitely does not double up as a spade. Try digging a hole with a shovel and you'll see exactly what I mean. Now, there are all different types of spade, pointed ones, square ones, round ones. Everyone has their own preference. This is the type that I like best. Yeah, it's not the most useful of garden tools, believe it or not, on a homestead, even though it's probably the most associated with gardening, but you definitely need one. Next up, we have the mighty brush cutter. And this is how you weed on a small holding or homestead. It's basically a giant strimmer, and most of them are sold with a strimmer head in place of this with a nylon cable, which is really only useful for cutting grass up against walls or fencing. If you have to tackle 2-meter hogweed, nettles, bramble, and other perennial weeds as I do every year, then you need a metal attachment. There are many out there. I used to use these, which are circular saw brush cutter attachments, and they're very effective. Then I discovered this. It's called a mulching blade, and it's about 1 kilogram in weight, and it's superb at controlling perennials. Remember, if you cut them before they go to seed in June or July, then you can add the organic matter directly to your compost, turning those weeds into a resource on your small holding, or you can feed them to the animals. Speaking of which, the long handle trowel is next on my list, and this is my tool of choice for hand weeding and for planting out. The long handle means you have leverage. It's just so much better than conventional small handle trowels. It also doubles up as a tape measure for spacing seedlings when planting out, because that is exactly 30 centimeters or 1 foot. I got that tip from Patrick Whitefield, may he rest in peace, fantastic advocate of permaculture in temperate climates. We're doing quite well. The third most essential tool on my list for growing is, of course, the wheelbarrow. And instead of telling you what a wheelbarrow does, which I suspect most of you already know, I'm going to compare the 3 which I now have, which I've acquired at different times over the last 6 years, because not all wheelbarrows are made equal. And that's something that I've learned since moving here. Why do I have 3? Well, one might be full of potatoes, while another has stones in it for building or clearing, while another has weeds in it, soil. They're just constantly in use. But of the three I have, this is the only one which I would buy again. It's lightweight, it's easy to maneuver, and because of this support bracket, it's very, very stable. It's also about the same price as the other two. Like I said, not all wheelbarrows are made equal. It was the first one I got. It's really easy to walk with because it's not too wide. Wide wheelbarrows tend to tip over to the side. Yeah, aluminium wheelbarrows like this, definitely the way to go. And if you come back in another 6 years, I think I'll only have this type. At number 2, we have the long-handled fork, which is so much better than this fork, which is what I arrived with here at Mossy Bottom 6 years ago. Again, it comes down to leverage. This is also called a digging fork because that long handle makes it so much easier to dig with. It can also double up as a hay fork, which is very handy when you're moving compost or hay or straw around, although nothing quite beats the real thing when it comes to that, because this is much lighter. What could possibly top that, I hear you cry? Well, something which gets more use than all of the above growing tools put together. And that's because it's also vital for building and for living. And that is, ta-da, the humble bucket. Whether you're collecting weeds, mixing concrete, hauling water, gathering plant pots, or even herding pigs, you absolutely cannot function without buckets on a homestead. I would recommend buying at least 5, maybe even 10 to begin with, because they're not expensive and they do break, but they will always have a use. I could easily fill 20 buckets with random different things here at Mossy Bottom. So yeah, my number 1 growing tool, pretty modest item, but absolutely essential, bucket. Finally, let's tackle tools and equipment needed for living. And again, there are countless things which I'm not going to list here. Pots and pans, forks, knives, plates, towels, blankets, because you'd need those things wherever you live. The question is, what are the tools most essential on a homestead, which you otherwise wouldn't need? And this up here is the first item on my list. And yes, it is an internet router or router, depending on where you live in the world. I'm sure many of you are watching this video through one right now indirectly, but what makes this router somewhat different is that instead of connecting to a copper phone line or a fiber optic line, it uses a mobile phone SIM card. And in a country like Ireland, that means you can connect to the internet with access to at least 4G in 98% of the country, or so they claim, without needing any kind of physical connection to your property. The signal where I live is particularly weak, so I built a unidirectional aerial using scaffolding poles, which makes the internet here as reliable and fast as any broadband connection I've ever had. What more could I want? Next is this and this, which is a 12-volt electric water pump. This one is submersible. Used to move water from one location to another. For the first year I was here, I used nothing but buckets to move water around. And although it kept me very fit, much more fit than I am now, it didn't leave me much time for making videos or anything else. A submersible water pump like this is about €50, and it can be run off a battery or solar panels. If you've got an acre or more of land, then having pumps like this really is essential. There are all sorts of applications, whether you're filling duck ponds or IBC tanks or draining water from areas. Submersible pumps and water pumps in general, especially 12-volt ones, are really, really useful, and I couldn't recommend them enough. This is, of course, a felling axe, but I use it for splitting bucked logs. Why don't you use a splitting axe, I hear you ask? Well, I do own a splitting axe and I've used dozens over the years, but I find for very, very dense, often twisted hardwood, like the hawthorn or elder I have a lot of here, that a felling axe like this just works better. It's lighter, it's more accurate, and it penetrates into the wood deeper. Splitting axes are great for straight, softwoods, ash or sycamore, something like that. But the trees that grow in my hedgerows don't tend to be that compliant. Either way, if you want firewood for your stove, you will need some way to split those logs. An axe is the tool you need. Anyone with a caravan or motorhome will have seen one of these before. In fact, anyone that's ever owned a car will probably have seen one, except this is a leisure battery. 12 volt, just like the one in your car, but with much higher amp hours or stored power. And if you build a small solar rig like mine up near the caravan, then this is where you will store that energy. It will of course power a 12 volt electric system in a caravan, and it'll also power an electric fence just like this one, which I use to keep my pigs in. And if you connect an inverter to it, you can even run low wattage mains powered appliances off it, like your laptop or internet router. If you don't have an electric connection, one of these is probably vital, and if you do, like me, it's probably still vital on a homestead like this, because it gives you power in remote locations. Next, an item beloved of every survivalist, paracord. And this stuff is impossibly strong, especially when you think it's only 3mm thick. It can take many, many times my weight, and it has millions of uses on a homestead. I use it constantly, patching holes in chicken netting, creating a rainwater collector, and of course an improvised washing line. This has been here about 4 years now and takes all my washing. It's pretty darn strong. Or of course just tying things down like on my trailer. You certainly will get a lot of use out of some paracord if you live on a homestead like me. Whoa. Now for something which may seem unnecessary until that is you try to live without it, like I did in that first year, and that's big plastic storage boxes. I have over 10 of these spread around, and I use them for storing animal feed, human feed, and anything which needs to be protected from rodents and from damp. Before I bought these, mice would eat their way into anything I stored here. And items like clothing and books, which I didn't have enough space for in the caravan, would go mouldy every winter. Plastic boxes with fully sealing lids like these have absolutely changed my life. I even now use them to store my animal feed outside, right next to the enclosure they're needed for. Come on, Moss. My chainsaw is up next, and I was lucky to be trained in how to use one safely long before I moved here, so I was confident buying it. But a chainsaw like this will allow you to coppice and manage hedgerows and forested areas for firewood, i.e. for heating. Without this, you will spend 10 or 20 times as long cutting and bucking branches with a handsaw. You'll have some mighty muscles at the end of it, but very little time or energy to do anything else in the winter. When it comes to chainsaws on a homestead, buy small. The smaller, the lighter and easier to maneuver. They're designed for this kind of work. Bigger is definitely not better. I've heard electric chainsaws have come on a long way in the last few years, but personally I would always stick to a petrol one, especially a Husqvarna, because they are so reliable and fuel efficient. I spend about 20, maybe 30 euros a year on petrol for this thing, and it produces enough firewood to keep my little caravan warm right through the cold months. At number 3 we have tarpaulins. And when I first moved here, I wasn't aware of the underground spring, so I was using tarps to gather rainwater, which I was then filtering and drinking. I remember those days quite fondly. And it worked perfectly, unless of course it was windy, in which case it blew off across my neighbour's fields. Tarps though are another one of those versatile items like buckets that you can just never have enough of. Whether you want to create a shelter, suppress weeds, they're great for that, keep the rain off tools, keep the moisture in mushroom logs, or a million other things. They're just so useful, especially when you're starting out and haven't got things set up yet. So at number 2 for living, we have wellies. And yes, I do admit, if you're moving to somewhere with a drier climate than the west of Ireland, which let's face it, is everywhere, then you probably don't need wellies as much as me. But I can honestly say here, I wear my lovely wellies or rubber boots every single day, right through the summer and every other season. And it amazes me when, despite my advice, volunteers turn up wearing brand new hiking boots, which on day 2 are full of water and for the duration of their stay never dry out. Wellies keep your feet snug and dry like nothing else can. You can stomp in streams or muddy puddles to your heart's content, and even the pigs approve of them. What a genius invention. Finally, the number 1 most essential tool for living on a homestead is this guy. And yes, I know a dog isn't exactly a tool. They are, of course, members of your family, but they also perform a vital function in this context. Moss here protects every other animal on my homestead. I haven't lost a single one. And more crucially, a dog is a companion who will always be by your side, and especially at the beginning when things are really tough, that's probably the thing you need most of all. Even in the middle of winter, when it's pouring with rain, and even windier than it is now, I'm out fixing fences or feeding animals, Moss is right by my side, resolute and reliable. Do you object to being called a tool, Moss? Nah, he's fine with it. Okay everyone, that is just about it for this video. I hope you've enjoyed it, and anyone about to embark on their own homesteading adventure might even have taken something useful from it too. Thank you to everyone for continuing to watch the content which I create and support my channel and life here. Your contribution, still to this day, overwhelms me. It really does. I'm so grateful to be in the position that I'm in. So again, a huge thank you. And stay tuned for many more videos this year. I've got lots of good stuff coming. For now though, from me and my favourite tool here, bye for now. Born in a Quaker town where folks worked good and hard for the ones they loved and got above. Each day they punched their card, and when evening came back home again, they'd rest a while and say, "'Tis a hard old life, but for kids and wife we'll work as another day." When the sun rose low, back to work they'd go, singing on their way. For job and home to call our own, we'll work as another day. Oh, I grew up. Lost dog. Up, 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 up. Good boy. Good boy. Yeah, that didn't miss. Even if you intend to create a no-dig garden, you will almost certainly still need to dig. So, at number 2 on my list of essential items for living, Moss, come here. Come here. Good boy. Have you put on weight, Moss? I don't remember you looking this thick. So, at number 2 on my list of essential items for living, we have... Oh, God. Oh. even in the middle of winter when it's pouring with rain and even windier than this, and I'm out fixing fences or feeding animals, he is right by my side, resolute and reliable as these planes, which never stop flying over me, do they, Moss? No, they don't. Moss dog. Good boy. Puss, puss.